Dark clouds covered the sky as the funeral procession gathered in the quiet cemetery. Black umbrellas filled the space like a sea of shadows, while powerful figures from the underworld stood silently around the grave of the late Mafia king. At the center stood Adrian Volkov, the newly crowned boss of the empire, his expression cold and unreadable. Beside him stood his wife, Elena, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted by grief but determined to stand beside her husband during the most painful moment of his life. As the priest finished the final prayer, whispers moved through the crowd. Everyone expected Adrian to speak about his father and promise to protect the empire. Instead, Adrian slowly turned toward Elena, his eyes sharp and distant. From his coat, he pulled out a folded document and handed it to her without a word. Confused, Elena opened the paper. Her heart stopped. Divorce papers. Gasps spread through the crowd as Adrian spoke coldly, loud enough for everyone to hear. He accused Elena of betraying the family by secretly leaking information to rival gangs. Elena's face turned pale. She tried to defend herself, her voice shaking as she insisted she was innocent, but Adrian refused to listen. To him, the evidence had already spoken. The humiliation was unbearable. Surrounded by enemies and allies, Elena felt the world collapse around her. Adrian signaled to his guards, and they stepped forward, escorting her away from the grave. As Elena walked out of the cemetery alone, tears mixed with the rain. She placed a trembling hand on her belly and whispered softly, promising her unborn child that she would survive this betrayal somehow. The night after the funeral was colder than Elena had ever felt. The rain had not stopped, and the streets of the city looked darker than usual. With no home, no protection, and the weight of betrayal crushing her heart, Elena walked alone under the dim streetlights. Her mind replayed Adrian's cold words again and again. The man who once promised to protect her had publicly destroyed her life. But the humiliation was only the beginning. As she turned into a quiet alley, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. 3 men stepped out of the shadows, their faces hidden under dark hoods. Elena's heart pounded. She recognized the look in their eyes immediately: assassins. Someone didn't just want her gone from the Mafia family. Someone wanted her dead. One of the men pulled out a gun. Fear shot through her body, but Elena instinctively covered her stomach, protecting her unborn child. She took a step back, trembling but refusing to beg. Just as the gun was raised, headlights suddenly flooded the alley. A black car sped toward them, forcing the attackers to jump aside. Before they could react, armed men stepped out of the vehicle with precise, professional movements. Within seconds, the assassins were disarmed and forced to retreat into the darkness. Elena collapsed to her knees, shaking. A tall woman wearing a long black coat approached her calmly. Her voice was quiet but powerful. "You shouldn't be alive tonight," she said. Elena looked up, confused and exhausted. The woman extended her hand. "Come with us. If you want to survive, and if you want revenge." 3 years passed, and the underworld began whispering a new name with both fear and curiosity. Across hidden casinos, secret meetings, and shadowy warehouses, people spoke about a mysterious leader known only as the Black Queen. No one knew where she came from, but her influence was spreading quickly. Powerful smugglers, hackers, and mercenaries had begun working under her command, forming a network that rivaled even the oldest Mafia families. What no one realized was that the Black Queen was Elena. The frightened woman who had once walked alone in the rain no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, and far more dangerous. Under the protection of the secret organization that had rescued her, Elena spent years learning everything about power, strategy, negotiation, finance, and combat. She studied the weaknesses of every major crime family and built alliances with people who had once been ignored by the underworld. At the same time, Elena gave birth to her son, Leo. The boy had his mother's quiet determination but carried the unmistakable features of his father. Every time Elena looked at him, she was reminded of the man who had abandoned them. Instead of filling her with sadness, it strengthened her resolve. Slowly, Elena began expanding her operations. Several smuggling routes that once belonged to Adrian's empire started disappearing. His trusted partners began losing money, and unknown investors quietly bought out businesses connected to his organization. Behind every one of those moves was Elena. She didn't rush her revenge. She played the long game. And somewhere in the city, Adrian Volkov was beginning to notice that someone powerful was quietly challenging his empire. Rumors about the Black Queen grew louder with every passing month. Entire shipments vanished overnight, secret accounts were emptied, and several of Adrian Volkov's trusted partners suddenly switched their loyalty to an unknown new power. The underworld was restless, and Adrian could feel his control slowly slipping through his fingers. Inside his dark office overlooking the city, Adrian studied reports scattered across his desk. Every document pointed to the same mysterious figure pulling the strings behind the attacks on his empire. The name appeared again and again in whispers from informants and rival gangs, the Black Queen. No one knew her real identity, her face, or where she came from. But Adrian hated mysteries. "Set up a meeting," he ordered his most trusted advisor. His voice was calm, but there was danger hidden beneath it. "Tell her the Volkov family wants to negotiate." The message spread quickly through the underground network. A few days later, a reply finally arrived. The Black Queen had accepted. The meeting place would be Adrian's most luxurious casino, a place where power and money mixed freely under glittering lights. On the night of the meeting, security surrounded the building. Armed guards watched every entrance while high-ranking criminals gathered inside, curious to see the woman bold enough to challenge Adrian's empire. Adrian waited in a private room above the casino floor, his expression unreadable. When the door finally opened, a tall woman dressed in an elegant black suit walked inside. Her presence was calm, confident, and commanding. Adrian looked up, and suddenly froze. Standing in front of him was Elena, the woman he had divorced 3 years ago. For a moment, the room fell completely silent. Adrian stared at the woman standing in front of him, his mind struggling to accept what his eyes were seeing. Elena looked nothing like the fragile woman he had once known. She stood tall and confident, dressed in an elegant black suit that matched the cold authority in her eyes. The fear and sadness that once filled her expression were gone, replaced by calm control. "Elena," Adrian finally spoke, his voice lower than usual. She offered a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of someone who had already moved on from the past. Without waiting for permission, she walked across the room and sat down across from him as if she belonged there. "I prefer Black Queen now," she said quietly. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. The realization struck him like a storm. The mysterious rival who had been attacking his empire, the brilliant strategist stealing his routes and allies, the woman who had forced the entire underworld to pay attention, had been Elena all along. "You're behind everything," he said slowly. Elena folded her hands calmly on the table. "You finally figured it out." There was no anger in her voice, only confidence. Adrian felt something unfamiliar rise inside him, regret. 3 years ago, he had pushed her out of his life without giving her a chance to defend herself. Now she had returned not as his wife, but as someone powerful enough to threaten everything he controlled. Their eyes locked across the table. This time, they weren't husband and wife. They were rivals. Adrian leaned forward slowly, his eyes still fixed on Elena as if afraid she might disappear again. The room felt smaller now, filled with unspoken history and tension. For years he had searched for the mysterious mind attacking his empire, never imagining it would be the woman he once loved. "You've changed," Adrian said quietly. Elena's expression remained calm. "People change when they're betrayed." Her words carried no anger, but they cut deeper than any accusation. Adrian remembered the funeral clearly, the rain, the accusations, the divorce papers he had handed her without hesitation. At the time, he had believed he was protecting the family from a traitor. Now, looking at her steady gaze, doubt began creeping into his mind. Before he could respond, the door opened again. A small boy stepped inside, holding the hand of one of Elena's guards. The child looked around the room curiously before his eyes landed on Adrian. For a moment, Adrian felt his heart stop. The boy had dark hair and sharp eyes that looked painfully familiar. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Elena noticed the shock in Adrian's expression and stood up calmly. She placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Leo," she said. Adrian's voice came out almost as a whisper. "He's mine." Elena didn't confirm it directly, but her silence was enough. Adrian looked at the child again, realizing the truth he had never known. 3 years ago, when he forced Elena out of his life, he had also pushed away his own son. And now the family he destroyed was standing in front of him, stronger than ever.